You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Brendan, I want to lead this show off with a pretty important question, because last week on the pod, you made a kicked up a bit of a fuss, made a pretty big declaration about Wizard basically being dead in Blitz. And then you've turned around, and it does look a little bit like you were trying to set people up for the Battle Hardened last weekend.
If I didn't say Kano, I definitely misspoke, and I stand by. Kano is just dog tier right now. But so I actually wasn't planning to play that event. I was boycotting Blitz, and last minute, Michael Fang came from New York to stay with me. He woke me up out of my bed, and he said, "Brendan, what better way to get back at Brian Gottlieb than winning this tournament with Wizard?" And I was like, we'll do it. So, I just wanted to show that the Stormstrider's ban on Icelander is not enough. It's still the best deck in Blitz. And Kano did not need to die for those sins. But yeah, Kano is bad, and Icelander is, in my opinion, I genuinely believe this. Icelander, at least the list that I was playing, which was not my list, it was given to me by Michael Fang. And I do believe it is a Wolfpack list. It's busted. It's super good. It was very fun to play. And I actually really enjoyed the event.
All right. Well, we'll hold off the the mob for this week, maybe. So, of course, you did compete on Sunday. It's Battle Hardened Dallas was Saturday. Classic Constructor. We'll dive into that, but as well, Blitz was a PTI event, right? So winner got a PTI, and I think was there some sort of gold foil or something as well?
Yeah. So I got to the finals. Like I said, Michael Fang came down to Texas, but he came kind of essentially with Yuanji. Yuanji was staying with someone else. Yuanji's also from New York, and both me and Yuanji made it to the finals, so we just chopped it. He was on Old Him, and I was on Icelander, so. I don't know. We played it back. Yeah, we played it back. But we just chopped it. He got the gold foil. I took the PTI, and then we split all the prize money. Because basically, the way the PTI events work, if you don't know, you have to win, or you pretty much don't get anything. It's pretty rough. It's like winner gets a PTI, a gold foil, and 1,500 tickets, and second place gets I think it's 1,000 tickets, which is effectively $100. But that's a really big drop off. That's like over $1,000 to probably less than $100.
Fair enough. Sounds good, but
yeah,
fair enough. Awesome. Well, what is this pod about this week, Brendan? Tell us about episode 79 of Arsenal Pass, and then I want to hear a bit about your week in Flesh and Blood as well.
Yeah, so it's just with Worlds on the horizon, you need to be thinking about Blitz. You need to be ready for Blitz, and it's a serious. Whether or not you think that it's a serious format or if it has competitive integrity, you're going to have to play it, and you're going to have to play it for debatably the 5 most important rounds of the entire tournament. So we're just going to be breaking down the format from what we saw. It's sort of the first, showcase of said format, right? So this is since the bans. I think the last big samples, the last big data that we have is mostly from the team tournament. And we're working with a lot, both Uprising and the bans. So a lot of things going into it. A lot of changes were made. The meta that showed up was not what I was expecting, and I do expect the meta to adapt quite a bit moving forward, to be honest.
Why? I guess a quick question is, you talked about 5 rounds of Blitz at Worlds, which is definitely true. So for the 250 players, potentially, because unless we forget the last 5 rounds, there's probably going to be a lot of people dropping before we get to the Blitz rounds. Why should anyone else care about Blitz right now?
Why should anyone else care about Blitz right now?
Yeah.
I don't have so the thing is I think that Blitz is a fun format. I know a lot of armories play Blitz. So if you're a player that plays at armories, Blitz is going to be a relevant format for you, period. If you're not, I don't think it's unlikely that we see Blitz as a pro level format in things like callings moving forward into 2023. I could be wrong, but I think that it will be, if not for callings, for those sort of day 2 events, right? If you don't make day 2, you can go play like the PTI event, basically what I played this past weekend. And I would not be surprised to see quite a bit of that being Blitz, because we are coming off the back of a supplemental set. Nevertheless, if none of those things sort of wet your whistle, I think that Blitz is, I think it's actually pretty fun right now.
I'll bail you out on this one, yeah.
Go for it.
I agree. I mean, we've got these PTI events that look like they're happening pretty regularly in conjunction with Battle Hardens. Now, it's weird because these weren't really announced by LSS, these PTI events that are happening with Battle Hardens. They're effectively giving out 3 PTIs on a weekend for a lot of these things now. But what is happening is they're helping supplement some of these events that are happening. So we saw them at Nationals, of course. I think majority of Nationals, if not all the Nationals. We've also seen them now at SCG Con, and we're going to see them at a few other events. But the other thing as well, like you talked about, is, of course, armories, depending on what armory scene you're playing. But with the impending release of Dynasty as well, that is also something to see. Like you say, Blitz is going to continue to be really relevant, and we're going to head into another skirmish season as well, which is inevitably going to be Blitz unless something drastically changes. But LSS have said Blitz with limited is kind of the way that they look at those events moving forward anyway. Plus, actually, Brendan, like you said, outside of Worlds, I expect in Q1 or Q2 of 2023 us to have a pretty significant Blitz level event, I think, another calling or the like.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We're coming off the back of a supplemental set in the form of Dynasty, so your sort of limited callings are not really on the table. I would be pretty disappointed to have any major professional events before the next limited set to be Uprising Draft. Yeah, it would be. I think that everybody would universally dislike that, so we will likely see main format being class constructed, but I 100% expect Blitz to not only probably get its own calling or multiple callings, but be the format of those sort of, if you miss out on day 2. PTI
Have we heard anything about ProQuest? Like, I actually wouldn't be surprised to see ProQuest for, maybe not the first season of ProQuest. So ProQuest season, I guess it's 3, but ProQuest season 4 potentially be Blitz. It kind of, as you move forward with this format post a supplemental set, we've already seen stuff that would make sense in Blitz. It's I don't think we've seen anything for ProQuest season 3 yet at all, other than actually I don't think we've seen anything at all. So that could happen as well. Yeah,
I would keep in mind. I would say, like, if we get, obviously we've gotten the Emperor in Dynasty, but if we get some more young heroes as well, because I know in Crucible they threw us a few young heroes, and in Everfest as well. It's something to look out for. If we get like 3 or 4 young heroes in total out of Dynasty, it kind of makes sense for Blitz to be more at the forefront as a competitive format, just to experience the set design that they give us in the set.
Well, they're pushing it forward as well. Like, we're seeing this obviously at World Championship. We're going to have the Blitz format. But, more focus and scrutiny on the format as a whole. So with the ban suspended announcements, of course, where that's kind of moving. And it feels like a real attempt, whether you agree or not with cards like Stormstriders being banned, Brendan, to balance the format and to turn it into a format with, I would say, a bit more integrity and a bit more metagaming to it. So really interested to see. The more I talk about it, the more I really wouldn't be surprised, and I might actually be pleasantly surprised to see Blitz be the format for ProQuest season 3 if it feels like it's in a good spot, especially post Dynasty. But with the caveat, I wonder if we see a slightly different format for these ProQuests. I think, an X+1 round scenario is not where you want to be. You might want to be at, like, say, X+2 or 3, so that you've got, say, X3s making top 8s in a ProQuest event. Might be a little bit better just based on the format being so fast and things like that. So interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I guess I kind of have a funny story about that, which we'll leave till later, about how I started off my Sunday event, because it was not in the best way.
Let's jump straight into it. Tell us about your week in Flesh and Blood, and tell us about the weekend, of course. Let's take us through it. So you Battle Hardened Dallas, which I know Michael Fang ended up winning on Saturday, yourself taking out the PTI event on Sunday. Big congrats to both of you. What did you play on Saturday, or did you just not bother showing up for the event, Brendan?
So on Saturday, I played Bravo, which is effectively the same as not showing up. Basically, the way it went down in my head is that I would rather play a quote-unquote fun deck than play a sort of meta deck that I'm unpracticed on. Yeah, so I played Bravo. I know that, dude, honestly, for years, I've hated Bravo, hate everything about kind of Guardian, especially OG Bravo. I thought it was so boring. But he's got a few more tools, and it is fun to hit 5s with crush effects that completely disable their ability to play the game, which is what I was actually trying to do, because I know that Texas and the region, down here, at least in the South, there's a lot of Fi. Turns out I was slightly off on that meta prediction. There was a lot more Icelander and Oldhim than I expected, which didn't actually hurt me that bad, but I did expect more Fi. that being said, yeah, what was playing Bravo, came into round 1, lost to an Icelander. So that Bravo list actually against like Michael Hamilton's Bolander list, you can totally win. Me and Michael Feng played it quite a bit the night before. It was like 50-50. I felt very comfortable, but I unfortunately played into an Icelander that was the old, sort of more traditional list with freezing point. It's very hard for me to beat that. I have to go extremely fast because I'm just going to get comboed for my entire health. If I had Zealous Belting to the deck, I might have been able to win, but I actually had an IP3 because me and Michael Fang were also late on Saturday. So basically we showed up on Saturday. We were in the venue. Michael was like, I'm a bit hungry. So he decided to start eating a sandwich. I was like, looked through my deck, realized I had 81 cards. I'm looking for the last card that's, the extra card. And then Michael texts Yuanji. He's like, where are you? Like, what? They haven't announced anything. And Yuanji's mid-match. He's like, I'm table 617. So yeah, we both got IP3s. Michael ended up winning his match, but I lost to the Icelander. Honestly, pairing into Icelander with IP3 is probably best case scenario for me, to be honest. If I paired into 5, I probably would have been pretty tilted because I would have lost because of that IP3. Whereas I think I lost because of my deck building decision. After that, I basically got to round 6. I won all my matches to round 6, and I played against Brody Spurlock, a name that a lot of people know by now. He was on Briar. It was a great back and forth match until he hit me for 31 damage. There's just not much I could do after that. Ended up winning my last match. So I ended X2 and missed top 8. I think I got 12th. I played a sort of a deck that I sort of whipped together, the night before. And I guess it was quote unquote fun.
That might be one way to put it. I'm surprised when you said fun and then Bravo and you use them in the same sentence. I was quite surprised about that, but just based on your history with Guardian. But I just dug this up, Brendan, because I wanted to find this. This is a message I sent to Brendan this is my Saturday evening. So this would have been Brendan's like very early Saturday morning. So before the event, it might have even been the night before, I guess. I say, what are you playing for Battle Hardened, by the way? Please say not Bravo, unless you've got some ultimate Icelander tech. And then, because I saw a random message you like posted.
I did not play that list, by the way. The one I sent you, I did not.
I didn't look at the list. Yeah, I didn't look at the list. I just saw that you had like said, "Oh, might play Bravo," and I was like, "Oh, good joke." And then I like went away, and then I was like, "I'm gonna message him. Surely he's not playing Bravo." And then you just message me back, go Bravo, lol. I can be Icelander. And then and then I find out what you played against round 1, Icelander, loss
with an IP3. So there is a silver.
I'm just saying.
The devil's in the details with that one. That a freezing point Icelander, pretty hard matchup. But Bolander, I would have been fine. And I beat Icelanders and Oldhams after that too.
Yeah. Tell us about your. So you went X2 in the end on the Saturday. Missed top 8. What about Sunday? So again, showing up late, I heard punctuality, maybe not your specialty at events. I would recommend not doing that for World Series. You do need to be in the coverage booth.
I would say punctuality, not Michael Fang's. What was funny is so we both got IP3s and we were like, okay, we'll get up earlier for Sunday. I wasn't planning on playing, so we get up on Sunday. Michael was very relaxed in his demeanor. So I was like, oh, he was really not worried about getting there on time, I guess. And apparently he was telling me he was like inside, he was just stressing. But I asked him for I was like, okay, I'll play. Can you give me your Icelander list or whatever? So he had to sort of break down the deck and give that to me. And we ended up being a little bit late because we had to run back for cards for Brody. So we get there. And the issue is actually we didn't sign up. So they paired the round, then we went signed up. So we got the automatic round 1 loss. The way it works in a PTI event is if you get a round 1 loss like that, you do have to go undefeated, which I did. And the Icelander list, just getting in, like, we'll break it down a bit more, but it was very powerful. There was 4 Icelanders at the event. The event was mostly fine, Oldham. And all of my matches felt fundamentally unfair in my favor. Most of them were not close. My closest match was actually against a Kasai in my last round. And it kind of just ended up that way. Outside of that, I think that the deck had favorable matchups into every sort of medium tier deck, which kind of includes Kasai and all friends, and then into Oldham, very favorable. Into Phi seemed quite favorable. Into Chain, favorable. I didn't play against Briar, and then Prism was probably going to be the hardest matchup, but the Prisms were, for the most part, except for the one that made top 8, were getting eaten alive by all those Phi decks.
Okay, fair enough. Good recap. Well, my week in Flesh and Blood has just been more testing, Brennan. So nothing too crazy. Blitz, some CC, and I moved house. So I have a blank canvas behind me. I need to. My office is a mess. I need to sort some stuff out. So that's on the cards the rest of the week. We head into the news.
Yeah. What do you have for us?
Well, Brendan, you actually prepped the notes this week, so I have some notes. News. I think that the biggest is that we've just started to trickle through and find these spoilers. So if you haven't sort of seen what's been happening with this, preview cards have been previewed. We're seeing some stuff outside of... Interesting, I said this to Brendan this morning. I said, funny that we have this like official preview season of the 30th to the 3rd or whatever it is, the 31st to the 2nd. And then we've already had like 7 or 8 preview cards. I was a bit confused about kind of the layout of it, but I think basically, there's a lot of cards in the set, and there's these marvels and stuff. They really want to show off these new weapons, which look really cool. So they have been allowing creators who have been given these early to show them, of course, in whatever way they like. So we have seen some cards already, and people have been kind of like talking about it on Twitter and stuff. You're not kind of involved in that discourse, but did just want to kind of like rattle off some of these cards, Brendan, and maybe get your thoughts on any of the ones that you particularly like. We had already talked about Blessing of Aether and Yoji because we'd seen those in the Armory kits for this current month, for the month of October. But since then, we have seen some of these Marvel weapons. So we've seen this Merciless Battle Axe, which is a warrior weapon axe, two-handed axe. We've seen this, probably the coolest name, I think, and this art looks awesome, to be honest. This Hanabi Blaster. This Mechanologist weapon gun, two-handed. That's a once per turn action that requires you to remove 2 stem counters and has this new keyword, Overpower. If you want to go check these out, you can... I think the best way probably to see this is if you're part of the Discord. You can go into the preview channel and see all these, either on ours or on the main Discord. Powder Keg is a really interesting card. This is a Mechanologist Majestic action item, 0 cost blue that we've seen as well, Brendan. That says whenever a Mechanologist gun you control hits, you may destroy Powder Keg and a defending equipment. So, potential to blow some stuff up there. More equipment hate. And your favorite card, I think, so far, Amethyst Tiara, which is a Runeblade equipment head, defends for 1, and says instant destroy, Amethyst Tiara, rune chance you control have Spell Void 1 this turn, and it has Blade Break. And then the thing what we saw this morning from Team Covenant's previewing is this shield, the Seasoned Savior, which is a Guardian equipment offhand, defends for 3, has Battle Worn, but when you equip it, so when you start the game with it, you put 2 -1 counters on it, and to go along with that, there's a card that removes some counters. I think it's called like Reinforced Steel that can remove some of those Battle Worn counters off of offhand weapons. And then I think the last one we've seen this morning is a card called Sap, which is deal 3 arcane damage to a target hero, cost 0. It's a wizard action, and it has Surge. And Surge is a keyword that says if this deals more than 3 damage to a hero, you may remove an energy counter from a permanent they control. So interesting. Lots of stuff happening there. What are energy counters, Brendan?
I think that maybe energy counters are used on Tunic and Illuvian Costello so far, but I could be incorrect. Yeah. It's a weird mechanic. I got a bone to pick with the Runeblade Tiara, obviously. So my issue, it's more Kano hate, which kind of pisses me off because it's just like, stop. Like, Kano's already having a hard time. But I also think that this equipment is borderline unplayable unless there's some way to get like plus EV using it in like a Runeblade mirror or something. I think that this is actually very bad against Wizard generally. It's okay versus Aether Wildfire if you plan to have Rune Chance up, which is actually quite unlikely. Unless there's some sort of instant speed way to create Rune Chance in response and then pop the Tiara. I think that it actually kind of sucks, but there could be some form of there could be some use case of it where you use it in like a Runeblade mirror, or it can just efficiently block them. But I don't see that happening because the Runeblades, you're actually sacrificing the Rune Chance, right? So you should be losing value for the most part, or kind of netting equal. So I actually don't think it's that good, but I am bummed to see more Spell Void. I think Spell Void is sort of a non-interactive and boring mechanic. You don't have to do anything for it. It just exists on a permanent on the battlefield, and you just pop it, and it's sort of, it blocks damage. I don't think that's very cool. So not a big fan of the card, but the Mechanologist weapon, pretty cool. I think that's going to be played. I think it'll be in most sideboards. For Mechanologist decks, obviously it is more on the boost side. Powder Keg is great. I think the Warrior Axe sucks. and I think the Guardian Shield might suck as well, but it's kind of TBD for more cards to be released.
Yeah, Hanami Blossom has no cost, effective sort of resource cost in terms of it's a once per turn action, remove 2 counters, and the way you get counters is by boosting. So, yeah, that's interesting. It's funny that you said, you don't like this interactive spell void thing. Didn't you just play a deck that had Frost Hexes in the weekend?
Yeah, but I actually never had to cast them. That's the thing. Is like that deck has, if someone wants to play Total Oldhim into that deck, it can combo, but outside of that, the deck never needs to combo because it does so much physical damage on its own turn that it creates windows, which is basically how Wizard does damage. So, yeah, and it just like emeritus them on their turn. It inevitably leaks damage. So you really can't fatigue the deck. And if you actually try to and you, for some reason, are packing Oasis or Spite Sink Below and even Rejuvenate, then it will just combo you.
Fair enough. I'm just trying to, keep you accountable for the cards and the things you call
it was Michael Fang's deck.
Interactive, fun,
Don't
and
point
unfun.
at me. Michael Fang's deck. I'm just a pilot.
Play Bravo on Saturday.
Yeah, I like fair flush.
All the Bravo listeners tuning out now. They're sick of me. Otherwise, in the news, I mean, that's kind of it. I just want to remind people that we do have our preview card coming up. Ours is going to be, as far as I know, still in that preview window. I believe ours is November 2nd. So look out for that. Not sure when, how, why, what, where.
I think it's confirmed. It's confirmed a cold foil like token or a common because we gave LSS so much slack for some of their recent ban announcements that we've been downgraded from our previous status, and it could be a cool common, but it might be sort of on the level of Invigorate or something like that.
Well, yeah. I gave LSS an 8.5 last week in the
I did too. I really like it. It took a lot.
7.
That's a really high grade for me. That's really high.
Flesh and Blood is celebrating 3 years in the Flesh and Blood this week, doing a few giveaways and stuff on fabtcg.com, their Facebook pages, their social media pages, Twitter, etc. This is some really cool like lore stuff and just kind of history behind Legend Story Studios and the launch of Flesh and Blood if you want to go and check that out. I know there's an article with some sort of like OG community members. There's a little quote from Luke Badger on there, the current world champion, Brendan, lest we forget, Luke Badger, the Ira Deck world champion. So he's, he might have to relinquish his title, or he might be there to defend it in a few weeks' time. I don't know. But yes, there is this really cool article as well, talking about kind of the first few weeks and launch of Flesh and Blood and Alex's kind of start. And just, it's pretty crazy, to be honest, like looking back at this. I was reading these articles they published and just where we are now and what's happening, and the fact they're about to play the first World Championship in just a few weeks. We've had 2 Pro Tours this year. We've had this more than a year now, more than 18 months basically of this amazing organized play program, and it's going to culminate for 2022 in World Championships in 3 weeks' time. Yeah,
Luke Badger. I wonder if he'll be there with his Cognition Nodes deck.
Whoa, you can't spoil it.
It's already spoiled. The cat's out of the bag, monkey's out of the box. World Championships is very exciting. Sort of in line with one of our Patreon pods and one of the hot topics of Flesh and Blood. We are competing for the best player in the world. We got some pretty interesting storylines coming in to the World Championships. Obviously, Michael Hamilton on a tear, winning almost every tournament he touches, and Pablo Pintor back-to-backing the Pro Tours, as well as plenty of others that have just had accomplishments that I didn't think would happen in Flesh and Blood, especially this early. Double national champion, like this stuff is crazy, and I think that the World Championships this year is going to be the culmination of all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that kind of does it. But I would recommend going check out this article. It's basically a timeline and history of Flesh and Blood so far through the start, October 11th, 2019. In fact, the launch. It's quite a cool thing to have a look at. Brendan, we do have a command and cookout question this week, so maybe we'll jump into that if you're ready to go.
Yeah, took Michael Fang and Yuanji out for some barbecue this weekend. Paid the price to the porcelain gods the next day, but I'm ready to go.
All right, we have this question. It's actually a question that comes from last week's episode. I do want to say as well, if you do want to get your questions in for the command and cookout, we did have a few questions coming over the week, which is awesome. I've got a bit of an accumulation of questions now, which we will start to read on the show. If you do want to get your question and read out on the podcast, you can do so. So many ways to do it. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. Let us know it's a command and cookout question. You can tweet at us, DM us, email at us, arsenalpass@gmail.com. No one slipped a note to Brendan over the weekend, so a bit disappointed about that. But whatever way you want to get your questions in, you can do so. This question comes from Brody and was a question from YouTube comments actually last week, and says, "G'day from up in north in Darwin," which, if you're not familiar, is very, very far north in Australia, basically the desert, I would say. I really enjoyed the pod today. I wanted to put a question to the Cookout segment about Dramai. Where does she sit in the meta, and what is she supposed to be doing? I've picked her up recently, and she struggles hard into low and wide, so Fire, Katsu, Briar to an extent, and struggles into tall and narrow Guardian and gets eaten alive by Viscerai. Where do you two see as her best matchups, and what do you think she's solved? Or do you think she's solved, or is there still a way to go with her? Cheers, gents. Keep up the quality discourse. Thanks for the question, Brody. Brendan, what are your kind of thoughts on Dramai? I guess Brody's talking more about, I'm guessing, Classic Constructed, but we can talk a bit about Blitz as well. Of course, we're going to lead into a bit of a pod on Blitz.
Yeah, I don't think it thrives in the sort of aggressive meta, even though we've kind of turned away from that recently with the popularity of Oldhim and Icelander coming back in as Prism has faded out. There still is a lot of Fi running around and enough Briar that you're right. Dramai probably struggles into. I only played the deck a few times. It felt okay into Briar, but I can imagine to Fi that it would be kind of annoying. And I think that if you're building the deck in the most sequitur way, right? Like you have the dragons, you've got your red cards. Yeah, I think it is weak to those decks. Is there a version of the deck in which it could be successful in that format? Maybe. The true answer to that is I don't know. Struggling into the sort of go tall decks, I actually think it does okay into things like Guardian. Another pretty popular class constructed deck, surprisingly, is Dorinthia, which I forgot to mention, Hayden. There was a ridiculous amount of Dorinthia at that an unbelievable amount, like one of the most represented decks.
Maybe Bravo was a good choice then.
Yes, and at round 3, round 4, the table 1, it was a very long table 1, was half Dorinthia. It blew my mind. But yeah, I think that Dramai does struggle particularly into the aggro decks, which makes me not want to pick it up at the moment. But I could see a world where there is, some innovative deck building that goes, behind that deck, and we maybe see a version of it that can be successful in this type of meta. But the thing is, I think if you're going to have success in today's meta, you need to be able to. You can't be a very narrow deck. I think you have to be able to attack quite a few different strategies, right? You got to be able to beat Oldhim. Oldhim's going to be there, and you got to be able to beat the aggro decks because they're going to be there as well. There's also Icelander sort of looming behind that, but you need a pretty all-encompassing, powerful strategy, and I don't know if you can just specifically target one thing right now.
Yeah, I think to answer Brody's first part of the question, I think from my perspective, what is kind of the role of Dramai right now? And in Class Constructed, I think it's to prey on those decks like Ultimate Icelander. It's to be the kind of, the third part of that Rock, Paper, Scissors, I guess, is what people might see Dramai as, is, the deck that kind of places or as a way to target the 2 ice decks that we're seeing played. I'll say the 2 we're being played because, of course, we do have Lexi, which is seeing less play when it comes to being an ice deck. But then I think, yeah, I agree. The matchups that are tough for you are the aggressive matchups. In particular, Fire, I think, is a very tough matchup, and we've seen Fire. We talked about it on the pod a lot last week, rising through post the second and third week of nationals and be in that top 5 sort of representation of decks and look fairly strong as well. In terms of, I guess, what you can do about it, I mean, if you're struggling so I guess low and wide, I understand, and that might just be the way that Dramai is looking right now. You might need to be innovative, and there might be deck lists and ways that you can build it out there that could change those matchups. I have heard people say that they have a good matchup into Briar, so I don't know what those particular lists look like. That's not been my experience. But as well, if you're looking for, I guess, some ways to beat Guardians in particular, I would recommend going and checking out some of the coverage from the UK Nationals. I know Jamie Faulkner, I think is his name, was playing Dramai in that event and had a few games on camera. In particular, I think he was the player who played against an Ultim as well in top 8, and you can see how they end up winning that game. So there's some good resources out there on Dramai as well. But I would say, you're looking to play Dramai into an Icelander and Ultim meta and have those game plans short up, and maybe less so into an aggro meta.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with you. I'm really interested to see if someone takes that deck in a different direction. We saw that recently with Icelander with Michael Hamilton. But But yeah, I think that Jeremiah is by no means quote unquote solved.
No, that's a good point to put out, because Brody does ask about that. Definitely not. There's definitely, I'm sure, very different ways to look at it, and we've already seen some iterations and innovation sort of in those lists come about. We saw these like Chromide, Tomo Fiendel lists come sort of in the later few weeks of national season, etc. So something to look out for. But thank you for the question, Brody. Again, if you do want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, you can do so in your preferred method. But Brendan, why don't you take us into the main topic? Talk to us about Blitz, I guess.
All right, so to start it off, I think we need to look back at sort of what I perceive as the most relevant Blitz data, being the team tournament. This is pre-Uprising. So in that tournament, we did see a lot, like Oldhim by far being, I think it was by far the best deck, probably converted the best, was sort of the pillar of everybody's team. Kasai was played a lot, but I don't think it converted very well in that tournament, or it converted, well when it was played in the past into the old Viserai meta, although it did put up some wins, despite, because Viserai, I guess, was found a bit late into that season. Outside of that, we saw a bit of Rhinar at the team tournament, and then quite a bit of Chain and Briar, just sort of these premier aggro decks. I think a very little bit of Prism. I don't think a lot of people are Prism, although it was a good call.
Not much.
Yeah.
Did well, though.
Yeah.
Did well.
Michael Fang on the sort of second place team, running Prism in middle, running and getting into all the Oldhims. And then we also had...
Winning in Sydney, Prism.
Yep. And after that, I guess we have Kano, which was on a lot of the finals teams lineups, right? It's just interesting because in the team tournament, you have like pretty much every team that is trying to win, right, locks Oldhim. There's obviously there's exceptions to that, but Oldhim was mostly going to be on every single team. And then you had most likely an aggro deck or a counter Oldhim deck, something like Prism. And then usually you kind of throw
Rhinar, yeah.
Or then the Kano kind of fits in that third spot unless you want to run another aggro deck or a Kasai deck. So the idea is like you run Kasai and it's sort of this kind of middling deck that has fair and relatively 50-50-ish matchups into a lot of the field. I think that was the idea behind Kasai. So it's kind of this boot for your team. But yeah, that was what the meta looked like going into this sort of post-Uprising and the current format of Blitz. So we had the bans, Hayden. So we banned Bloodchief Skelata, Mask of the Pouncing Link, and Stormstriders. Very significant, and they shook up the meta quite a bit. First and foremost, Stormstriders, I think, completely deleted Kano out of the meta. I'm not saying that Kano is completely unplayable, but you're not going to see him at tournaments. Like, there's going to be a onesie-twosies, right? Like, a couple people that pet deck it are going to bring it. It's outside of that, unless somebody completely innovates the deck, and plays on a different axes, Kano will virtually be not represented at most competitive Blitz events. Bloodchief Skelata was a necessary ban, but it's not. I don't think it's really taking any decks out of the meta, right? Like I think Briar's still very playable right now, which is sort of, I think it was like the premier deck that was using Bloodchief Skelata, and the Mask of the Pouncing Link is a very significant ban onto Fi. And I think that Fi suffered greatly from it. Yuanji's not so controversial tier list say that Fi was living legend. Nevertheless,
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a big hit, right? Like, and actually, if you just want like a little bit of extra kind of like pepper in there of the skirmish season 5 sort of results as well. Like Fi was winning a lot of skirmishes in that kind of season. I think in the last week alone, it won the most skirmishes. There's not great data for skirmish season 5 other than just kind of some reports from the LSS team, but Fi, Chain, a deck that was doing very well, Rhinar, Ultim, these decks, the narrative hadn't changed too much other than Fi into the format, right? And then all of a sudden Mask of the Pouncing Links gets banned, as you say.
Yep, and I do apologize when I talked about the Stormshadow's ban. I did sort of gloss over Icelander there. Yeah, I think the Stormshadow is absolutely busted in Icelander. Basically made Icelander pretty, from what I understand, and after playing Icelander this weekend, I could see it. It probably put Icelander relatively close to the power level of the old Viserai combo deck. Just being able to play very, very efficiently on both sides of the turn cycle and having big burn to do so. Way, way too powerful. And I think a lot of people saw that Stormshadow's brand and thought that Icelander was not going to be good anymore. So yeah, showing up on the day, Hayden, showing up on Saturday, I expect a lot of Briar, a lot of Chain, and a lot of Oldhim. And I actually expected quite a bit of Icelander as well. Nevertheless, there's only 4 Icelanders in that field, which is a very small portion of it. It's mostly Oldhim and actually mostly Fi. Fi being, I think, the most played deck on the day. Like and very little chains and briars, at least relative to the amount of Fis. So these are Fis running, for the most part, Mask of Momentum, which I think is quite a slow card in Blitz. But yeah, bubbling to that top 8, we see mostly Oldhim top 8. We see 1 chain. There was a briar in there, and then a prism. So the prisms, for the most part, because Michael Fang also brought prism, kind of got eaten alive by these Fi decks. But one of them did kind of make it up to top 8 and ultimately lost to Yuanji on Oldhim, actually. But it was a very, very aggressive Oldhim list. So yeah, moving forward, Hayden, I want to talk about like where I think that the Blitz meta actually lies and sort of the immediate adjustments. And I think that go ahead.
I think that's a good call.
Yeah.
I was just saying, I think it's a good call because, like, the representation you saw on the weekend, I think, is people adjusting and people, probably just playing decks they knew. Fi, again, had a phenomenal skirmish season 5, right? Well, take the quote unquote best deck of that format, maybe. Yeah, it loses a card, let's try it. But maybe that's not the reality going forward once people get a little bit of a handle on the format.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that there's going to be an immediate adjustment off of Fi, to be honest. I also think that Icelander will pick back up in popularity. In my opinion, the Icelander deck, when I was playing that Icelander deck, it was not my list. I was playing it for the first time, and I think I had less than 10 games on Icelander total in my life before I picked it up on that day. Every single game I played felt fundamentally unfair in my advantage, and it felt like I just had a better deck than all of my opponents. So, yeah, thank you to Michael Fang. But that deck is relatively straightforward to play, and I think that a lot of people will pick it up and find success with it. That will sort of, if we talk 2 to 4 weeks in the future, I think that opens up the meta more for Prism if it becomes more Icelander Oldhim heavy. But I do expect a lot of these 5 players to shift back onto the chains and the briars because I think that those decks can be pretty successful in the current state of the game. Hayden, on your side, I want to kind of ask you from the outside looking in and sort of your own experience and recent testing with Blitz, where do you think the current meta lies, and what do you think are some underappreciated decks that are not being played?
Blitz meta is tough, I think, because it always seems to be, it rotates around traditionally skirmish seasons, and then we've had a couple of events like the calling, so the team calling and the calling Utrecht, which gives a little bit of kind of, competitive injection outside of just a local scene with skirmish, which is really interesting. But the meta generally tends to revolve around like, what do people want to play and what do they think can do well, and what are like these game plans that are like executable and powerful. So, and then that usually translates to the big events as well. Like you talked about Viserai, obviously the Utrecht kind of meta, and then at the team event, Ultim was just like the pillar. Every deck, and I think all 12 across the top 4 had Ultim. It was just just too powerful to not play. I think the way that I look at the Blitz meta, I've played at least one skirmish in all of the skirmish seasons so far, and played multiple in many of them. I like the Blitz format. I like to kind of like try and be innovative and try and throw some stuff against the wall. And I think in this meta in particular, like if I just break it down from a theory standpoint, to me where it seems to come down to is like, what are the current powerful things, and what are the decks to beat? So Ultim, losing Crown of Seeds is obviously big, but it still does like a really powerful thing. It still has like a really good way to play either aggressively or defensively and be able to switch. The offhand shields are still really powerful things that you have access to. So you still, Saligmine in particular, I think is really strong. So you have that ability. And then you have these decks that don't want to play on that kind of axis. So Icelander, potentially, maybe Kano is, it's just not good enough now with Storm Striders, but Icelander still, evidently, as you pointed out, Brendan, as you proved, still a deck to be reckoned with. So you have that kind of there, and now Icelander does play a bit more on that I guess that combat damage axis to a degree. And then you have these aggro decks. So you have the chains, the briars you talked about. What the meta actually looks like in terms of what's the top dog there, I think is what needs to probably be found out, and that's what people are probably going to be trying to work out. And I think that comes down to like, what does the rest of the meta look like? So is it Ultim, Icelander, and then X aggro deck? Are they like the top 3 decks that people are looking at? And is it Plunder Run? Is that like the thing you want to do because that card is just obviously very good? It's banned in Class Constructed, but still legal in Blitz. Is that something you want to look to? Chain and Chain's ability, Living Legend, but available in Blitz. Is that something you want to look to? And then I think outside of that, if I said that was kind of the meta is, maybe it's Icelander, Ultim, the best aggro deck, maybe the second best aggro deck, the top 4, and then rounding out maybe the top 5 in terms of what I've expected representation of what this meta looks like, is a deck that preys on, like you just said, maybe something like the Ultims and the Icelanders, and it's Prism. So are those, in my head, that's probably what the meta looks like in terms of the top 5, where I think if we were to have another PTI event like we had last Sunday, this coming Sunday, that's kind of what I would expect the top 5 decks to look like, and that's how I expect people to approach the meta to start with. Where it goes from there, I don't know, and how people change it. I think it's really, what I actually think it's going to hinge on is how people can attack this, like, Ultim and Icelander decks, and what these aggro decks look like. Like, what axes does the aggro deck play on? Is it a deck that has access to a lot of resources and can be a bit better into Icelander for that reason? Or is it a deck that just goes like, yeah, Icelander's my bad matchup, but I smash these Prisms, I smash the other aggro decks, and I'm good into Ultim, for example?
Yeah, I think it's important to note the dichotomy of Prism performance. It's a good deck to prey on the form, like an Ultim format that gets a bit degenerative, right? Like a lot of people playing Ultim, whether it's aggressive Ultim or defensive obviously being the one that you'd probably want to play into as Prism. But if we keep running into weekends where people are showing up, I don't think it'll happen again, where Fi is the most played deck, but even things like Briar and Chain as the second most played deck, it's going to be a rough format to bring Prism to. I do think that Prism is sort of the great equalizer, and no matter how much I doubt Prism's ability to succeed in aggressive formats, it tends to kind of still be successful. So I would keep that in mind. It's a deck I definitely have on my radar at the moment. All right, Hayden, I just want to talk about the Icelander deck and what it was that I played. So it is effectively Michael Hamilton's Bolander, right? So it's an attack action. I wouldn't say base, but it has quite a few attack actions as an Icelander deck. Things like Scar for a Scar, Wounded Bull, Vandal's Fighting Spirit, Enlightened Strike. It runs Snapdragon Scalers and the Goliath Gauntlet. And basically what it wants to do is, usually you go second, so you want to be the first player to sort of tempo the hand. And your best hands tend to look like Enlightened Strike, immediately Snapdragon, Goliath Gauntlet, Wounded Bull. Does it always happen? No, but you can get pretty close to it. You can even Enlightened Strike, Snapdragon's Coronet Peak, Enlightened Strike, or Scar for a Scar into a Wounded Bull, Scar for a Scar into Aether Ice Vein. That's very, very good. So it has access to quite a high threshold of damage on its own turn. Then it will draw its hand back up, ideally its Arsenal of the Spell, and then it can sort of relatively efficiently play on the opponent's turn. The game does not go very long until you're already threatening lethal damage by doing that on the opponent's turn. Things like Emeritus Scolding, Ice Bolt, stuff like that. So I think the deck fundamentally is just trying to get more value out of its cards than the opponent. That's really what it comes down to. And I think that this group of people, that being now Michael Hamilton and Michael Fang, right? This group in New York, they have a very value and numeric and quantitative sort of approach to Flesh and Blood, and that is how they build their decks. Less based off individual cards and sort of specific synergistic interactions, but more based off, if I can get +1 value over my opponent, maybe 1 or 2 times in the game, I will win said game. And I think it's quite effective. And I think the Icelander deck, as you play it, you'll realize is the exact sort of personification of said principle. But yeah, quite an easy deck to play. It tempos on its own turn and then has the ability to either disrupt or damage the opponent on their turn as well. Very, very good disruption tools in the form of Blizzard. You can play Hypothermia, channel like Frigid, so has a great package against these aggro decks. I think a lot of people would look at this deck and think that its hardest matchup is going to be something like a defensive Oldhim. That's actually probably its easiest matchup. Oldhim without Crown of Siege just does not have enough cards to prevent the damage, right? So if you do E-Strike into Goliath Gauntlet, Fyendal's Fighting Spirit, on their turn, they should not have more than 1 card, and you sort of have a burn window there. So, and like we mentioned earlier, if they're defensive enough to not die via those burn windows, you always have the combo available, and there's almost nothing Oldhim can actually do about it. The hardest matchup is definitely by far Prism, because when Prism plays auras, Wizard just fundamentally cannot interact. Although you have things like Scar for Scar and E-Strike to attack very relevant auras, things like Arclight Sentinel, which you don't have a choice, or maybe something like a Genesis. You will lose so much tempo in doing so that it's quite painful. So that's probably the hardest matchup. And outside of that, it just plays kind of like the Bolander, the classic construction Bolander deck, but does it in Blitz.
the thing that it gains in Blitz is life totals are smaller. It's a lot easier to get to a lethal window quicker, like you said before. And the reason that I think Stormstriders was a good ban in this format, because I think it's particularly busted in Blitz, is the fact that you get to create this final window of a turn, and back-to-backing turns in a format where you start on very low life, especially when you can push damage to start. Icelander still gets to do that, even without Stormstriders, because you can still put a blue into your arsenal and still Waning Moon plus Emeritus or Ice Bolt or whatever, and push 5, 6, 7 damage, which is it's hard for you to talk about creating windows. Once you get them to a lethal range and you come in with an attack, or you push an 8th Ice Vein or whatever, and then on their turn, like, how much resources do they have left to be able to stop this damage that's coming at them? It's very tough, I would say. So that's what I think makes Icelander, this, and particularly this Icelander build, but I think Icelander in general good in this format, is like just that ability to still be able to play on that final turn even without Stormstriders. With Stormstriders, I think just kind of crazy. So it's going to be interesting to see how to attack that as well, I think, because it's not fragile, let's say that.
Yep. Despite the Stormstriders ban, I do think that Icelander is kind of the best deck right now, which I say very hesitantly because I do not want that deck to get banned. We'll have to see if it ends up being oppressive. I don't think so. I think that people can adjust to it, and the meta needs time to adjust. Yeah, I think fundamentally
that's pretty fair stuff.
Very, very fair, right? We're playing Wounded Bull and we're playing Snapdragon Scalers and Goliath Gauntlet, which honestly, when you play that equipment, you'll see it feels extremely powerful because of the low life totals. But yeah, the meta will shake it out. I recommend giving it a shot. Like you said, just get Michael Hamilton's class constructor list, just break it into a blitz list. You pretty much got it there. The equipment, though, is the most important part. Snapdragon Sailors, Goliath Gauntlet, just super, super powerful with the stuff you can do with E-Strike, and even Scar for Scar if you are ahead on life total.
The equipment in Blitz has always been by far the most powerful, and it always kind of struck me that people didn't play these equipment. Like, I think basically any deck in this format recently, from about sort of like, Monarch, Tails variant onwards, like Goliath Gauntlet to me has been the card that you play. Like Hardened Crossstrap was in every deck I had, and then Vest of the First Fist has kind of taken that in a lot of decks. Obviously it's harder, it has requirements, so it's not as kind of crazy as Hardened Crossstrap was, but you just fundamentally think, you start with this equipment. Goliath Gauntlet is 10% of, life totals. Vest of the First Fist represents a card. When you only play 3 turns and you see 12 cards, a card is worth, a higher percentage than it is in Classic Constructor. So these equipment, the what they do in Blitz is just far, far and away, these one-time effects are just far, far and away more valuable in a format like Blitz than CC. And I think because CC was the premier format for so long, and Blitz, used as this kind of secondary format, I think people forget that and think they have their kind of CC cap on, and sometimes you need to take that off and have the Blitz hat on and really focus on that. So the equipment, I think, for me, is going to continue to drive a lot of what happens in the meta, because I think those cards over and above kind of stand out and are going to do a lot of work, even in decks that... So I take a deck like Rhinar, right? Like, I think Rhinar's pretty fringe, and I think the reason for that, even though a lot of its bad matchups just got nerfed, it can struggle into these aggro decks, and then even Icelander I don't think is like is a good matchup for you, even with the kind of Stormstriders ban, because fundamentally your cards cost resources, and that's tough into Icelander. Plus they can also do good trades, but you still can turn 0 present 20 something damage, and Goliath Gauntlet and a chess piece that gives you resources is a big part of that. So these decks I think get the power from that. Dash is another example I think as well. A Vest of the First Fist enables a maximum velocity turn, which is 10 damages is half the opponent's life total. It's massive, and you're getting half that for free.
Yeah. I was surprised to not see as much Dash, to be honest. Like, Rhinar is one thing, and I think that Rhinar is going to struggle into this meta. Dash, I think that deck is very, very strong, but it just loses to these defensive Olden decks, right? Like, it's hard to pack, be a jack of all trades in a Dash Blitz deck. Maybe that will change with Dynasty, but right now, Tackle Pounder feels like one of those powerful leads you can be doing in like an aggro mirror, an aggro v mid-range mirror. But gosh, you got to figure out that Oldhim matchup. I think that
it's the same thing though, right? It's the same thing as the equipment piece I just talked about. Like, you start with Tackle Pounder, you start with that percentage of life total, 4 damage on the table, right? Like, you're already starting with that there.
100%.
20% of health.
Yeah, Blitz, it's funny because I know there's, I think at this point, Sasha from our testing group and I disagree on this very much, but Blitz right now feels like a very value-oriented format. And I think that, the Michaels, as I'll call them, have really nailed it and sort of the philosophy they had behind this deck and why it is successful. I don't think that, Blitz can degenerate into a format where it's like combo-esque, right? You have things like Viscerai, maybe even Kano, where it's not really value because the value you're hitting on Viscerai is 35 on like turn one of a blitz of a blitz game. It's just not realistic, and you can't outvalue that opponent going turn cycle to turn cycle. Right now, I think that that's a very reasonable thing to do. And if you can find more value than your opponent more consistently, you'll tend to win the game. The disruption package really helps with that because the decks that do go way above Matrix are things like Briar when they land Channel Mount Heroic, or things like Massacre Momentum. So you need to be able to interact with the aggro decks, or they will usually trade above rate on you. So Icelander does that perfectly. I want to talk about the biggest winner of the weekend, which I, despite doing well with Icelander, I think that Oldhim was the biggest winner. I think Oldhim performed very well. And at the same time, I played into a myriad of Oldhim decks. I played into defensive fatigue Oldhim decks. I played into Oldhim decks that were extremely aggressive. They were running Pulverize, the Rousey Ancients, things like that. And then also I played into like pummel decks. So like Frostfangs with 6 pummel Oldhim, all this this like disruption based Oldhim. That hero, despite the ban on Crown Seeds, seems like it's potentially still the pillar that it was. I'm not going to default say it's the best deck, but there's a lot you can do with it, and I think that it's strong both as a defensive and more fatigue-oriented deck, or just like an attrition-oriented deck, and also as an aggressive deck. It's very good.
Yeah, I don't like using, I guess, tier lists and stuff because I think stuff is just, it's too moldable and changeable, and it really depends on like builds, meta, pilots, etc. But I think like if you're looking at the kind of the decks that you need to understand and have some sort of plan into, because they're going to show up and they are good and they're consistently good. It is like Ultim and Icelander, I think, and it's both because of how they're able to play defensively, disruptively, and offensively, but different axes for each of them. But they do a job that's really solid. So I think you need to have some sort of way to interact with those, and the tough thing is they're on different axes. So it's like, what you might want to do into Ultim is different to what you might want to do into Icelander, for example, right? Like Icelander, you were just saying before, like punishes a deck like that can go above rate, like with Channel Mount Heroic in the form of Briar, whereas that's harder for Ultim to punish. Whereas they can punish poor defense a bit more with their kind of on hit effects from their combat chain. So it's different. I want to talk about just like the kind of the meta a little bit quickly, because you said about, what are the top decks, etc. I talked about those 5 decks before, being Ultim, Icelander, probably 2 aggro decks, whether that's the 2 Rune Blades or maybe one of them is actually Dash, like we just talked about, and then a Prism. But then there's also these fringe things that I think you can be doing, and especially if they've got this ability to really explode and like you say, play an unfair game. I think those are always going to be able to be around the fringe. But then I think the other thing I didn't talk about is these decks that can potentially say, okay, I sacrifice one of X of those top matchups, but I just have this ability to play on a different axis. And a defensive Dash could be that, right? Like, not going to fatigue because of items, but also is going to be able to slow the game right down. Is that good in Blitz? I don't know, but like that could be an example. For instance, I think people are going to get innovative with their kind of ideas, I think, is probably what I'm leading to, though.
I think there's another category as well, which I will dub Old Faithful. So Kasai, Dorinthia, Ira, fair decks, relatively fair decks in today's day and age. I think if you bring Dorinthia to a Blitz tournament, you can actually win that tournament, 100%. To be honest, Kasai, I really am genuinely surprised how Kasai wins anything, but it tends to actually, there are some Kasais up at the top tables. There are some Kasais that tend to keep having success, and I can't deny that. Bolton sucks, but that's fine. Ira, on the other hand, Ira's still pretty powerful in my opinion. I think it's a legitimate pick. It was a part from, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was a part of one of the winning teams back at the team tournament. I think that deck has just been
finals.
Yep,
finals. It was the team that beat us in the semi-finals was Ira, Ultim, Bravo, which was Newson Zhang, who's I think Operations and LSS was playing in that event and playing the Ira deck, which beat me on Reiner twice, last round of Swiss, and then the top 4, sorry. And yeah, it still does its thing. It's really consistent. It does a similar thing we talked about of like playing on 2 axes. It can play defensively because of cards like Flick Flack and Sigil, etc. But then also well offensively, Mask of Momentum, Kadachi's good, solid threats that are a good rate. 2 for 7 in the form of flying kick, etc. So yeah, agree. Those decks, and Kasai can do the same thing, right? Has a fridge, can do a defensive thing, but also can do a reasonable aggro impression and a combo impression. Like Kasai can kind of like dip its toes into all three pools, if you say, combo, aggro, defense, which is really interesting. So I think that's why you're going to see those decks, because they can win almost any game they play.
Yeah, I think that Iris slept on a little bit. I'm just kind of like mentally realizing that flying kick combos like pretty equivalent in damage to something like Wounded Bull. But like the Ira really explodes when it does get, depends on how many flick tags you have. It does finally get that 5-card hand, and it is able to throw that flying kick on the very end of the combat chain. It'd be quite devastating. But yeah, I think that Old Faithful is it's a fine pick, right? And I think you could take down any tournament with it, to be honest. Worlds, maybe not. But yeah.
Well, let's find out. So the power that Icelander has is, you can do that 7 or 8 damage off 2 cards. Like Ira can't really do that. You know what I mean? Like it needs 3 cards to be able to do that. So it is more about functionality, I think. And again, just another kind of tick in Icelander's favor, and a little bit in Ultim right now as well, is like the ability to play better off 2 cards than a lot of other decks in the format. And that's relevant when, maybe you're going first, for example, and you can present a threat, but then next turn you need to block with 2 cards and then still be able to present some damage. And if you can present above rate damage, that's going to set you up well, especially, as we talked about before, when you get to play the last turn of the game in a kind of bookend fashion. Play those 2 turns in a row.
I think to close here, just because it randomly popped in my head, just a little tip for any Oldhim players out there that do find themselves across from an Icelander. I had at least 2 Oldhims on the tournament end up playing AB4 into me. So they played the Lantern, and they were playing AB5 into me. It's pretty terrible, to be honest. Like, if you think you're going to fatigue via AB5, you literally just don't have enough resources in your hand, because I will attack you for 7+4 on my good turns, but maybe 7+7 on my great turns, right? And then we're going to go on to your turn, and you're not going to have any cards left if you didn't leak damage. And if you decide to pass, I'm just going to do the attack action thing again, and that just kind of loops until you die. And then if you do pack any sort of healing cards, whether it be Sigil Solace, like, the combo is always there. So don't put the AB5 in your equipment. Highly don't recommend. Probably AB3 so you don't get smoked by Blue Aether Ice Vein. That's just my little recommendation if you are on Ulta.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of takeaway so far is that, and I've said this on the pod multiple times, is that you're playing into Icelander. This is more for CC, but I think this converts over to Blitz as well, is that if you want to kill the Icelander, so, I'm not talking about fatigue here, you were just talking about fatigue, but if you want to kill the Icelander, Arcane Barrier is not really your friend. You don't want to be trading in your resources for damage prevention, because that's how Icelander wins games. They make you play on their terms, and then they're going to win because of it, because Waning Moon is very, very good and very resource efficient. It's like, if you look at traditional Wizard, right, it's like, okay, they don't have weapons, so I'm playing into 4 or 5 card hands. Not with Icelander. Icelander has access to an actual weapon. It can push damage that way. So I think Arcane Barrier in general is a trap into Icelander, and that's kind of what I've continued to say. I think 1 is generally correct in the Classic Constructor format if you're playing a proactive deck, because you probably are going to pay for Aether Ice Veins, and you're going to do that with the blue, so you might as well prevent the 1 arcane damage, and you can also prevent splits when they do Waning Moon stuff. But in general, I think, sacrificing your equipment, as we talked about in Blitz just before, sacrificing equipment in Blitz is massive. That's power equipment.
For Arcane Barrier as well. It's like the worst. Yeah, that's like the worst
that you're not going to use.
Yeah.
And you're playing on the axes. So you sacrifice your Goliath Gauntlet and your Vest of the First, for instance. You've just lost probably 5 or 6 damage just right there. And you need to get trading in 2 blues isn't going to get you that back, because now you're down to 6 resources. So not unless the game goes like 5, 6, 7, 8 turns are you actually making back that investment that you've taken away.
Yeah, I'm not saying you should play 0 Arcane Barrier, but if you think about it, Arcane Barrier actually nets you like 0 positive, right? Like Goliath Gauntlet
at best.
Yeah, Goliath Gauntlet is 2 damage. Like Snapdragon Scaler is probably going to be around at like 2 to 3 damage, right? Because instead of saying E-Strike Go again, I can now E-Strike Snap. Like there's just like very simple like quantitative ways of breaking down some of that equipment. If you look at Arcane Barrier, it's just like always neutral. It's like one of the worst things you can be doing in Flesh and Blood, to be honest, or at least in Blitz. The idea behind playing AB3 is like, okay, if I play 0 AB, I can just kind of get ground out, and the Icelander could be a very slow game, and we play on their terms if I'm not presenting enough damage. But also, there are quote unquote on hit effects with some of these arcane damage. So you now get you are going to have to discard to a blue Aetherized Fan if you do play one. So something to consider. But I think Blitz right now is a very value-oriented format, and Arcane Barrier is not exactly congruent with trying to get the most value out of your equipment.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the decks in the format then. Like, what's your kind of view on some of these aggro decks? Like, what does a good aggro deck look like right now, and what should it be trying to do? Like I said before, springs to mind. You talked about you said Channel Heroic. I said Plunder Run. Like, what are the cards right now? What are the decks potentially looking like to be a good aggro deck? Like, is it actually because of the way the format is and the text oriented? If Icelander and Ultimate are both good decks, do you want to be a bit slower potentially, or is that just a trap that you fall into?
Yeah, so I think the Chain deck is quite good, because I also think that if you play Eclipse and you also know how to play Chain, you kind of have relatively close to inevitability against Ultim. That being said, if in Blitz, if an Ultim counter pitch stacks you or just ends up ripping a Channel Lake Frigid on the turn that you're trying to go off, you don't have the life totals to sort of sit that, wait, and try to do it again. It can be pretty devastating. So something to consider. I think Briar's very, very powerful. Briar has access to, both Runeblades have access to Spell Void, which might be the way to go even against something like Icelander. But they kind of function off of explosivity. Like Chain does it through generating shackles and exploding onto you in sort of the later turns of the game, or just getting a single card advantage is kind of enough when you hit a Bounding Demagon off it or something. And then Briar has things like Chain of Heroic, Embodiment of Lightning. And so, I think, but if I'm looking, to answer your question, really, if I'm looking at aggro decks, I'm looking at those two aggro decks. I'm not looking at 5 right now. Someone could come up with a more innovative build of 5 and make me sort of change my mind. But the aggro decks to me are Briar and Chain, and I'd probably err towards Chain at the moment, just because there's so much of this more defensive Ultim running around. And I think the Chain has pretty good matchup, because they can't. I know I said counter pitch stack you, but Ultim without Crown of Seeds, and even with Crown of Seeds, cannot do that to you, because due to the nature of Shackles banishing the top cards of your deck, you just turbo through your deck. So they have to get pretty lucky.
Hold.
Yeah, they hold it in Arsenal.
To hold the card.
Yeah, and play without the Arsenal, or they have to get lucky and draw it.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of view is I think in theory Brian might be better into that matchup, but into the Soul Shackle, the ability of Chain is so powerful. So I'm not sure right now. I would say the other aggro deck that's worth taking a look at right now is Dash. Yes, the ultimate matchup might be abysmal, because Tickler Pounder is is just a far one. You're on boost plan, right? So you're on a sort of one-way ticket to Fatigue Town, but and we've obviously seen it a lot in CC, and that plan be fatigable in CC. So that's interesting. I will point out, one of the good kind of transitions is that in CC it's say 40 life but 60 cards, whereas you're at 20 life and 40 cards, so it's a bit more doable. I think the fatigue aspect it's harder to be fatigued, I think, if you're on a pure boost strategy in Blitz than it is in CC, is kind of my takeaway. And then I don't know, there's kind of these other aggro things around the fringe. Could there be a fire build that we're just not looking at? A more Katsu-esque fire build. I think a card like 100 wins is very good. But obviously without mask the pouncing links, that becomes difficult. I don't know. Is Rhina still a deck that's in contention? I still want to play that deck, but is it the right decision? I don't know. So there's some things to look at, I think, in and around the format.
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of sums it up for me, Hayden. That's really what I learned this weekend. That's my current thoughts on the Blitz format, and that's how I look towards Worlds. As we're about 3 weeks out here, I do have a heavy heart after playing Icelander this weekend, knowing that Stormstriders will never be unbanned until Icelander Living Legends, despite Kano not deserving such a heavy ban hammer thrown at him. But yeah, Icelander without. If you want to take anything away from this podcast, Icelander without Stormstriders is still, in my opinion, if not the best, one of the best decks in the game. So if you didn't have it on your radar, you should. The list is out there. I know the Team Covenant recently played it on their stream at the time of this recording, which was Tuesday. So go check it out there. I would be super happy to give you the list myself, but I can't take credit for building that list. It was Michael Fang's list. He gave me it 1 hour before. And yeah, I appreciate that. And I would say go check out their respective channels to get the specific one. And all the credit goes to them on that deck build.
Yeah, I think good takeaways. Look, I we sit on different sides of the fence with the Stormstriders ban. I think it's a good ban. I think Kano was very, very, very good in this format as well. So regardless of, I know we can talk about it ad nauseum and results and things like that. But I think for the way forward with Blitz, it feels to me, it just reinforced, I think, this weekend a good decision because of Icelander as well, right? Like you say, like that is a big part of it. But I still do think Kano's interesting. Like 0 Kano played at this event makes 0 sense to me, I think. I don't think the deck is that poor. I still think it's playable. So, like we still see Fi be the most played or second most played deck, whatever it was, but no Kano. Like that seems crazy to me. But yeah, we'll see what happens. We've got a few more of these PTI events. I don't know if they're Blitz. I assume they might be Blitz with Columbus coming up and things like that. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. A few more events before we get to Worlds.
The reason that happens is because if Stormstrider was still legal for Kano in Subworld, I would be willing to bet that Kano would still be less than 10% of the field. Just because that's just the amount of people that have put the practice into Kano, are willing to play Kano, et cetera, et cetera. So you tack on a ban like this, like, yeah, all those people that were crazy enough to play in the first, they've just jumped to the other wizard, or, they're on like the sort of cookie cutter Fi deck. I just think that like Kano's inherently I hate talking about it like this because it seems so elitist, but it does take a little bit longer to get proficient and comfortable with that deck than some other ones, Yeah,
it definitely can. I mean, I'll stand by that. I thought Kano was the best deck in the format of Blitz before this ban, but I will also agree that, picking that deck up and piloting it and wanting to play that in events is tough. Like, all your games are pretty hard. You start at 15 life. That's not easy. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, no Google review this week, but if you want to submit a Google review, you can check us out at ratethispodcast.com/ArsenalPass. The Google reviews help us out a lot with SEO and just getting our names out there. We are also on YouTube, of course, youtube.com/ArsenalPass. Throw us a subscription. We're getting close to that 5,000 subscribers. Big goal for us. Hopefully we can hit that before 2023, at least.
Come on, please. We can hit it before the end of October. We can hit it before the end of October.
I'm being modest.
And we'll do a giveaway. We'll even do a giveaway.
That's cheating. Okay. Hayden and I are both on Twitter. I'm located at BrendanAPG. Hayden is at Fyen_Dale, FYEN_Dale. I do think that we will do next week's episode live on Twitter Spaces. So we'll record it as normal, but we'll be using our phones as well to sort of do it live on Twitter Spaces. So if you're on Twitter, you can kind of listen in. Hayden and I guess today we had to do a little backup, but usually we just kind of cruise through these things. So there's no reason why we can't do it live. And I love everything that Twitter Spaces offers for the community. We could even, we'll likely stop the recording at the end and then open up a small Q&A as well if time allows us. But yeah, Hayden, anything else to sort of close it out for this week?
Oh, I just think if you've gotten to this far in the podcast, Brendan, why did we back up the podcast today? Because we never do it. We never need to. I think we've done every single podcast for the past 2 or 3 months in one take, if not longer. But today was an exception.
There's only one thing. There's only one thing that gets Hayden and I fiery enough, and that's a little bit of Kano talk.
Ban and suspended list.
I wonder if anybody thinks that like my sort of like my passion for that subject is feigned at all, or if like we kind of do it up for the podcast, because like we straight up argued about that for like 10 minutes and then went and looked at data and like it's just so we had a little backsy upsies this week, but next week we're back. We're back. We'll be back live.
Yeah, and we'll do Twitter Spaces, which looking forward to, and we'd love to have people drop in, and we can definitely open up some questions based on the pod afterwards. Looking forward to it, Brendan.
Yep. See y'all next week.
Next week.